Hello. Let me tell you about why you're here. You're watching this to get a sense of what it means to cite evidence, which you probably mostly know, how to cite evidence, which is easy, but it's important to get the details right, and why you cite evidence, which once you know that, it'll help you make choices. I'm making this video so it'll always be there and you can watch it again if you want to get a specific detail, and you can watch it as fast or as slow as you want. I want it to be as simple, as detailed, and as clear as possible, but if I miss something, please reach out to me by email. Unless, of course, you're watching this in the distant future, in which case I'm already gone. Makes you think about life, I guess. Anyway, let's get to it. Hello. Let me tell you about why you're here. You're watching this to get a sense of what it means to cite evidence, which you probably mostly know, how to cite evidence, which is easy, but it's important to get the details right, and why you cite evidence, which once you know that, it'll help you make choices. I'm making this video so it'll always be there and you can watch it again if you want to get a specific detail, and you can watch it as fast or as slow as you want. I want it to be as simple, as detailed, and as clear as possible, but if I miss something, please reach out to me by email. Unless, of course, you're watching this in the distant future, in which case I'm already gone. Makes you think about life, I guess. Anyway, let's get to it. This video's got an agenda just like class. We'll look at answers to questions that will get more abstract as we go. First, what do you do when you cite? Then, how should you cite? This is the formatting discussion. And lastly, we'll think about why we're citing so we can cite well. So, what even is a citation? A citation is where you say something about another source you can precisely identify. You do this when you directly quote and when you condense down what another source says in your own words. In this video, we'll be using the word citation interchangeably with the word reference. You need formal citations in any formal academic writing or every kind I've ever seen. What a citation is an indication of something someone else says or does that needs your analysis or comment. All citations are something you do things with. In the model of the pyramid of abstraction, citation is at the bottom. I chose a pyramid of abstraction as a metaphor to express that cited evidence is the basis for your argument. I wouldn't start building an argument out of your own words and ideas until you have citations to the sources firmly in place. Another point in using this metaphor is to discourage you from writing about abstract ideas or making formal arguments before you have your facts in order. In terms of the format of an essay, I don't think you should start writing an introduction or conclusion paragraph before you've done all your body paragraphs where your evidence is and it's analyzed. I want to argue against what many of us are taught, which is to write in the order a reader reads. I think we should write in the order that lets us build our ideas on a firm foundation. In the writing process, you will save a lot of time noting citations as you read the sources, and you can cite anything you're interested in your notes or anything you think is important. You will not save time if you skip readings or don't take notes and trust your memory to help you get back to sources if you need them later. In my most frustrating experiences, this just doesn't work. Even worse, if you leave citing to the end, you could be up against the deadline and then stuck flipping through sources searching for what you only remember kinda. What if it's not there? That's happened to me so many times, I don't want it to happen to anyone else. Do you see what I'm getting at? Let's take a moment to look at some practical details of citation. Basically, there are two main real ways to cite, which are in parenthetical citation or in footnotes. If you learn to cite either of these ways, you'll be good for any class. But lastly, there's a quick way that is acceptable in college classes when you're limited in your sources. First, let's talk about some general rules of practice. For direct quotes, you'll want to include everything you need to make a coherent unit of meaning. In other words, you should be able to read the direct quote and your words alongside it in a sentence aloud, and it should make sense to you. It should sound natural. You should include punctuation inside the quotes that you'd expect to find in the sentence. You should not include any citations within citations. So if your source uses footnotes, parens, or is marked with numbering in the text like in some copies of religious scriptures and ancient texts, you will not want to include these references. Leave them out. You also don't want to use ellipsis and brackets if you can avoid it. I'd try to reproduce the exact phrasing the source uses without changing any verb tenses, singular and plural, or capitalization. And I'd try not to leave anything out. If you want to quote two parts of a text that are far apart, you'll want to quote them separately. Let's take a quick look at an example of what to do and what not to do, which is a visual of what I just said. As for paraphrasing, you'll need to stay as faithful to the source as you can without putting in anything from that source we don't need. Remember that you never want to summarize the plot or argument of a source if it's not totally necessary to understand what you're quoting or if it's not necessary for your argument. When people write about stories, sometimes they can get carried away summarizing info that they don't need to. Paraphrasing makes things easier because you can highlight important features in your own way, but it does involve an element of analysis that quoting doesn't. Formal academic writing requires both paraphrasing and direct quotes as evidence. Because both are evidence, you have to have a citation when you quote and when you paraphrase. Here's an example of a paraphrase where I'm making a long story short, giving the details of context I want and no info I don't need. Now let's talk about how to actually write formal citations. There are two main ways. I'm talking about both of these formats according to the Chicago Manual of Style. Other formatting authorities like the Modern Language Association and the American Psychological Association are largely the same. The first kind is parenthetical notation, which is associated with the theoretical and applied sciences, social science, and area and cultural studies, so basically everything except the humanities, but you'll see why that is. In this format, you'll want to quote what you want to quote, or paraphrase what you want to paraphrase, and then put a set of parentheses at the end of the sentence. Inside the parens, you would typically put the last name of the author and the date of publication, followed by a comma and specific page numbers. You do not include the name of the author in the parens if you refer to the name of the author in the sentence, just the year and the page numbers. You should not refer to page numbers in the text of the sentence. So there's no need to say, in the letter from Birmingham jail, page 65, King says ... in your sentence. Just leave those numbers in the parentheses or footnote. Parens is very simple to use. However, there's a complication to the author date system for references to very old sources like religious scriptures, which often do not have an author in the academic sense. Moreover, the date of publication for recent editions and translations is way forward of the time of that the source was written. So it would look weird and awkward to see Aristotle 2014 in parentheses because Aristotle was not writing in 2014. For that reason, it's also kind of weird to see King 2000 in parentheses because that is not when Dr. King was writing either. So there is reason why, despite its simplicity, the author date format is less preferred in humanistic classes. Personally, I don't care or anything, but it makes sense to think about who is citing what and why. In these cases, in the parens, you'll want to identify the name of the source and then the precise location in the source, such as page numbers or chapters and verses in the case of scriptures or ancient texts. This is common at school and in church because on Sunday you don't usually hear "let's turn our Bibles to page 764, but rather to Matthew chapter 3, verse 13. The Bhagavad Gita and the Quran work in the same way. Citing scriptures or classical authors like Plato and Confucius like this allows anyone with any translation to locate what you're saying. In addition, you don't need to put the name of the source in the parentheses if the sentence before the parens uses the name of the source. For the works cited page, you'll need to present the facts of publication with the author and date in front of the facts of publication. There are two relatively simple systems here, one that use authors and dates and one that uses other identifying info in parens. Where you have a single, more complex system is if you use footnotes and endnotes too. At the end of the sentence, after the period, you'll want to click the footnote button on your word processor, which jumps you to the bottom. At the bottom, you'll want to write out all the facts of publication of the source and then write the page numbers or chapters and verses. This is a little block of text you can copy and paste from our class schedule. Because I trained as a humanities scholar, I refer to sources in the Chicago style that you cite in footnotes in the class schedule document. So you're welcome to copy and paste it if you're using footnotes. This looks like a lot of information, and it is. So in footnotes, you only need to record the full facts of publication the first time you cite a source. The next time you cite, you can abbreviate with the author and title separated by comma, or you can use the title in the case of scriptures. The advantage of footnotes is that it lets you cite without interrupting the flow of the writing and letting the readers choose if they want to see the original source. The other nice thing about footnotes is that you don't need a bibliography or something like that for a college paper, and I wouldn't ask for one. To be honest, I don't need a bibliography because I'm limiting the sources you use. So in a college class like this, just make it clear where your source is in the parentheses, and you really don't need anything else. I don't need a bibliography or works cited anyway. With all that clarified, let's take a moment to talk about why we cite in academic writing. So why are we all here? Why bother with this process? Well, the simplest answer is that it shows your readers that you precisely know what you're talking about and are focused on what your sources say. The humanities is organized around the principle of only talking about people in their own words and in their own terms. A citation shows you are precisely and faithfully referring to what is out there in the world. Because of this principle, you want to choose your citations as carefully as possible. The first step in choosing a citation is to make sure it will help you answer the question of the writing assignment. If you happen to find one of the important words from the question in the source, then that quote is a very, very good candidate to put in your essay. When you choose your quote and start writing about it, you'll want to make sure you're writing about the specific words that appear in this quote. This may seem obvious, but it's very common for me to find writers quoting particular details from their source that don't seem to be important to their argument. What I suspect this is that the writer got locked into an argument by trying first to answer the question and then had to look around the primary sources for quotes. That happens to the best of us, including me, so I'm not judging you in any way. I'm bringing up this issue because you can very easily avoid the problem by looking for citable materials in the sources, stuff that seems thematically important and where the words are uniquely special, and you just got to use them. Anything else, go ahead and paraphrase it. It's all evidence. You can use it as long as you cite your sources.